Hello, and welcome to the Former Review. Today, we'll be talking about 3 different movies. Now sit back, relax, grab your drinks, and let's talk about these movies.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Former Review. This is Season 3, Episode 51, and I thank you all for tuning in once again. Welcome to the 4th episode in the award season series, and as we are in award season, there are a lot of movies to be seen. If this is your first time tuning in, every year I watch all the films that have been nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, and all the acting categories. I do sometimes watch the screenplay movies if I have time, or if there's only 1 or 2 that I haven't seen. Now, these films haven't been nominated yet, but there's good indication of which of these films will be nominated. And because at this point the list is so big, and normally I only have 1 month to watch all these things, I decided to increase the amount of films covered in each episode to 3. So in the first episode of the series, I covered Mank, One Night in Miami, and Promising Young Woman. And in the second one, I covered The Trial of the Chicago 7, Ammonite, Pieces of a Woman, and in the third episode, I covered Sound of Metal, News of the World, and Nomadland. And in this episode, I will be covering Malcolm and Marie, Minari, and Judas, and The Black Messiah. And of course, a small update to my collection. And additionally, at the end of this episode, I will be announcing the winner of my 100th episode giveaway. This person will win a brand new copy of Black Panther on 4K UHD. So stay tuned. Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions, like how do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps that people like to listen on? How do I make money from my podcast? The answer to every single one of those questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing my podcast. And best of all, it's absolutely 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with some great sponsors. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's exactly what I'm doing right now. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. Again, that's anchor.fm/start. And I can't wait to hear your podcast. So I got 3 new 4K discs in the past week, 2 of which were Valentine's Day gifts. Now, we normally don't really celebrate Valentine's Day in any specific special way, but we do usually get things for each other that are fairly practical. And these gifts usually are in support of one another, whether that be a hobby or just something that somebody really wants. And what happens is that we pick out something that we want and then the other person pays for it. So my fiance Victoria, who y'all met in the 100th episode special, was able to get me Coming to America and Gladiator. And honestly, I can't wait to watch both of these movies. Now, the only update that I personally got for my own collection was a new copy of Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, which was the Target exclusive steelbook. I'm normally not a steelbook person, though I guess I'm slowly becoming one at this point, because sometimes they do look really good. I don't think they really add anything aside from a cosmetic aspect to it, but some of them really do look dope. And I knew I wanted this one specifically, but then Target had this online sale that brought it down to the same cost as the normal one. So I went ahead and bought it. I know already I've said online that I got it cheaper, but I misremembered the cost. It was the exact same price. It wasn't cheaper. But man, this film looks amazing. Coming from a native 4K transfer. From what I read, it is the same one as the one that was used for the Criterion Collection Blu-ray, and I've never owned that, so I can't really speak to the differences between that and this, but for the normal Blu-ray, it does look really different. And then additionally, the DTS:X audio is extremely impressive. It's an immersive, and you really feel while watching this movie that you are on this street in Brooklyn. And 31 years after this film's theatrical release, this film is just as important as it was back then, especially as a conversation starter. The events of the film took place in 1989, but they pretty much happened in 2020. The only difference here is that people now have phones where things like this can go viral instantly. And unfortunately, there's still too many Radio Raheems out there. And I definitely think everyone needs to watch this film, either if you haven't seen it before or if you haven't watched it in a really long time. And I would love to talk to anybody regarding this movie, but we'll save that for another time. Now, on to the movies at hand. But before I go into them, I do want to say that there's going to be some spoilers here. I do suggest that you go watch them first before hearing what I have to say about it, so the movie isn't completely ruined for you, but I will do my best to keep things somewhat vague so it doesn't. But I would say still proceed with caution. Also, I know I say this at the end, but the data shows that really no one listens to that part, so I want to reiterate it here at the front. And I want to instill the importance of writing reviews of what y'all think of the podcast. As I continue on, I always look for feedback from my listeners, and frankly, it's because I really do this for you all, and I want this to be entertaining. So you can always go on to your favorite podcast subscription and write a review, because I do check these out and I do want to know how you think I can improve. What do you want to hear? Do you want to hear more guests? What do you want to hear? Definitely let me know, because I want to grow and I want to get better. It's always about improving. So let me know, and you can hit me up on social media for that. Anyway, now on to the movies at hand. If you don't care about one of them, feel free to skip ahead to about the 2.5-minute mark for Malcolm and Marie, and the 19.5-minute mark for Minari, and the 30.5-minute mark for Judas and the Black Messiah. Or if you want to hear all of it, just keep listening. So sit back, relax, grab your drinks. Now let's talk about these movies. Malcolm and Marie is a romantic drama film written and directed by Sam Levinson. It stars John David Washington and Zendaya, who also both produced the film as the title characters. In this movie, a writer-director played by Washington and his girlfriend played by Zendaya return home after his latest film premiere, and their relationship is tested throughout the night. And this project was the first Hollywood feature to be entirely written, financed, and produced during the COVID-19 pandemic, while also filming in secret in June and July of 2020. So when the trailer for this dropped, viewers knew instantly that this film would be about a relationship filled with both love and also insults that is probably similar to really any couple who are stuck together in quarantine. But before we get into the analysis of this movie, let's listen to my trailer reaction of this movie.
I don't really know much about this movie, but I'm a big John David Washington fan, and Zendaya hasn't impressed me. Not that she's bad, but we'll see how this goes.
You are by far the most excruciating, difficult, stubbornly obnoxious woman I've ever met in my entire life. I love you.
That's not what I was expecting at all.
Oh, he's so sensitive. He's romantic. Bet he's sweet, right?
What is going on?
When he's not being in a terror.
Oh. I love the way you see the world, Marie.
I love that this is in black and white.
The unknown. It's what supports the tension of a relationship.
You're angry.
No.
Cool symbolism
What
with
if
the
that-
pot boiling.
Marie.
What if there's someone who loved them better?
See, when a black and white film is actually meant to be a style thing, it adds more, I guess, aesthetic to it that I just really, really like. Not older films in black and white. This is so much different.
Give me your pain. Give me your sorrow.
Oh, I love that shot.
Tell me where it hurts. I will carry you.
You know what, Malcolm? I feel like once you know someone is there for you and once you know they love you, you never actually think of them again. It's until you're about to lose someone that you finally pay attention.
Well, what is it, Marie? What do you want?
Really? You want to go there?
Yes.
Okay.
I will carry you. I will carry you.
You want control because you can't imagine the reason I'm with you is because I love you. Everything that you've been through, everything. That's what made you you. The girl
This
that
may
I
be the
love,
movie
girl
that's
that I fuck
actually
with.
impressed me. We'll see.
I will carry you.
All I wanted to tonight was thank you, Malcolm. That is it.
You know that I'm thankful. You know that I made a mistake, so why turn it into something more?
Because it's about how you see this relationship. Look at me. I'm the last person standing. Hold on to me for dear life.
Yo, I'm really intrigued by this movie. I think it's gonna be really intense. Almost like similar to Marriage Story, but I don't know, it's just the two of them, so it's a really interesting concept. I'm really interested.
So as you can see, I was kind of excited to see this movie. And this film definitely hits every one of those checkboxes with, honestly, each argument that they have showing a deeper problematic layer in their relationship. Like I said in the trailer reaction, the most obvious comparison really to anyone to make is to 2019's Marriage Story. While there's obviously a lot of similar aspects, that film is more about one man's side of divorce, whereas this film feels more about a power struggle between two people. From a stylistic perspective, Malcolm and Marie has a lot more compelling aspects in comparison to Marriage Story, from its beautiful cinematography to a great use of music to move the story along. So the film starts off with Malcolm and Marie, like I said, returning to their rental home, which is provided by these producers after the movie premiere. Malcolm puts on James Brown's Down and Out in New York City, and Marie starts to prepare a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese. I want to point out that I'm definitely not a fan of that mac and cheese. Anyway, anyone who has really been in a relationship can see that something is upsetting Marie. However, like Malcolm, we only don't know what it is. Eventually, we learn that it's because he forgot to thank Marie in his speech during the premiere. And at this point, anyone who's also been in a relationship should really know that Malcolm's wrong. It doesn't really matter what happens next or how much he fights it, he's wrong. If he had really just admitted that at the beginning and apologized, things probably would have been over early on, but then we wouldn't have a movie. Anyway, so that's the majority of this movie. It's their argument. It's not pretty, it's loud, and they say a lot of hurtful things. But tied into that, there's also a lot of affection between them. And as the audience learns of this very complicated relationship that these two people have. And as I said, as each layer is then pulled back, you learn more and more about these two people. Again, the music ties into each moment of their fight. And frankly, the acting by both people is absolutely on point in perhaps their best roles yet. Really, this film highlighted some fantastic acting scenes for the both of them. Let me comment here on the age difference between these two actors. Who cares? Yes, there's a 12-year difference between them. However, one, it's irrelevant in the context of this film, and two, also Zendaya is a 24-year-old consenting woman. So honestly, if the reason is because her first acting experience was on Disney Channel, then pretty much anyone who was a child actor should give you concern, no matter the gender. Anyway, moving on. So this movie shows these two opposing people. Malcolm feels very disrespected by Marie, and he wants to win the argument. Marie feels very unseen, so she needs his acknowledgement. If anyone was in this argument, it can be seen that this will obviously lead to very opposing positions, and it will lead to one of two results. Either they'll break up or grow closer together. Couples in general should be there for one another. When one of them struggles, the other one should be their anchor. That's part of what love is, putting the other person before yourself. And the movie shows that Marie struggled early on as a drug addict, and Malcolm was there for her. And as such, she feels that she owes him for that. But at the same time, she knows that he wouldn't be there if he was without her. In fact, there was a lot of inspiration that she gave to him for his movie and the main character. No matter what he says, it's very obvious that some of the inspiration did come from her. She feels that the star of the movie that he casted did not really give the same authenticity that she would have given if he had given her the role when she auditioned for it. And she reminds him by reenacting the scene in perhaps the film's best scene, where she scrapes a knife across the floor.
Do you remember those antidepressants I was on? I'm not on them anymore. I'm not doing well. I'm really not doing well. I've never been clean, and I don't plan on getting clean. I'm a piece of shit. I'm a liar. I cheated on you. I f***ed your friends. God, I feel like I'm crazy. me. Tell me where the pills are.
Honestly, just re-listening to that scene right now really makes me want to rewatch the entire thing. But the point is here is that she wants to be seen by Malcolm more than anything, and honestly, she deserves it because she gives a lot to him. He needs her there, and she does this to feed his ego and then also ground him when necessary. While one is obviously more significantly a problem, there's a lot of give and take in their relationship, and Malcolm uses her existence as an ego boost. Her being with him makes him feel as he's somewhat this better person because he has this somewhat hero complex.
You're not the first broken girl I've known or dated.
And I could demonstrate how many of these types of scenes are in this movie of how these two actors are really, really fantastic. But I'm not going to show every scene because I don't want to spoil it. But the biggest issue, or rather a question that this film has kind of brought up, more so from the internet, but why does a white filmmaker use two people of color to deal with his personal issues with film critics, and specifically to a LA Times film critic? Honestly, I don't have an answer. The more important aspect here is that it moves to then discussing how white media interprets a person of color's work. And a lot of fans and also critics will essentially lump together people of color as the next insert person of color actor. Why aren't they just not this next best actor? And I'm not saying that to be, quote, colorblind in an aspect, because an actor's ethnicity can be celebrated. However, saying that people of color are only the next insert person of color, it essentially pigeonholes people of color into those types of roles or types of films. Now, I like this idea of a film really showing how this is a problem in Hollywood. However, I can't say it doesn't feel odd that it's coming from a white director who also wrote it. Now, there is a lot of authenticity to the lines that they're saying that I know the director himself said that some of the words weren't his words and was more of just the two actors improving and what felt real to the both of them in some of these scenes. But at the end of the day, maybe this idea was so that more people would listen more because he's an ally to everything. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't think that worked well because that's one of the biggest issues that the internet brings up about this movie. So in the end, it remains to be seen why this film was made in the first place. What's the message? Now, the film does say that films don't necessarily need these, and then the question becomes, what is a point of a movie? And to display a story with good acting and that's it, fine. But there are films out there that have that and also a message, which is what pushes a film to beat the test of time. In the end, love is complicated, and perhaps Malcolm and Marie will not be representative of everyone's love. But these types of relationships do exist where the two involved go through a lot of heartache and still loved each other, but also questioned their love. Now, they can choose to break up or they can choose to be together still because now they both know that they need each other and that they can grow together from that. Marie knows that Malcolm loved her when she didn't love herself, and he knows now that she needs to be seen. And this movie really succeeds with its story, its details, the acting, the ending, but it does slightly struggle with the message. Now, one may not enjoy argument movies if that's a genre now, but this film has more to it than just simply a display of arguments to honestly enjoy time and time again. And like I said in my trailer react, I wasn't that big of a fan of Zendaya because she hadn't impressed me. But here, my word. And I really can't wait to see her more in movies, and John David Washington just continues to be great. So I would watch this movie again, which is more than I can say for Marriage Story. I have no inclination to watch that movie again. Alright, so now let's get on to the second movie in this episode, Minari. So before I get started analyzing this movie, I want to give a slight warning on my pronunciations. I will do my best to get them right. However, I am not fluent in the Korean language, so I apologize if I mispronounce any names or words. So Minari, or what literally translates to water dropwort, is a drama film written and directed by Lee Isaac-jung. The film stars Steven Yeun, Han Yi-lee, Alan Kim, No Kate-cho, Yoon Yoo-jung, and Will Patton. It's a semi-autobiographical take on Jung's upbringing, where a South Korean immigrant family tries to make it in rural Arkansas during the 1980s. And this film really does take inspiration from the Bible of a family trying to find new life. In the Old Testament, the Hebrews leave Egypt as, quote, strangers and exiles on earth, and were seeking a homeland as stated in Hebrews 11, 13, and 14. The Hebrews were immigrants coming into the promised land, and really the Yi family is no different. Jacob, played by Yoon, traveled from California to Arkansas to start their own garden or farm. His wife, Monica's played by Han, wants the family to do well, and especially for their son, David, played by Kim, who has a heart murmur. And their views do coexist, obviously. However, they clash when certain things happen that may or may not put the family at risk. When they were in Los Angeles, Jacob and Monica earned money at chicken sexy, which is separating the males from the females because the females can be sold for eggs and meat. When they move to Arkansas, Jacob essentially holds onto this hope that he's going to be the one who grows the crops for Korean families where others have failed. And one of the first problems that he has to solve is he has to find a water source or a well, which is another allusion to the Bible in John 4:6. And he makes choices and has to deal with the consequences, whether that be pain, joy, laughter, or even heartbreak at times. And they start struggling because it is really hard to make it here. And it gets so bad at one point that when Monica and Jacob are fighting with each other for I don't know how many times, the children throw paper airplanes at them that say, "Don't fight." Jung's direction is able to accurately capture what some immigrants have to go through when they come to the United States. Even as a son of a Japanese immigrant, there were many similar cultural values that my mother instilled in me. And even if one doesn't connect with that religious aspect or even the immigrant aspects of this film, the story itself taps into really what every human does, seeking the sense of belonging. As humans, we are constantly looking for that perfect job, that friend group, the people who will accept us for who we are and then help us succeed. People may not always get along, but good people that push through those differences between them are going to endure. And eventually, Monica's widowed mother, Sunja, played by Yoo Jung-yeon, comes to live with them. And this is very similar to what happened to me as a young child living in Minnesota. Now, I don't think I did anything similar to what David did to her, but this relationship between David and Sunja is one of the biggest pluses about this movie. Mostly due to Yoo Jung's acting here. She is so good that she should be nominated for Best Supporting Woman Actor. And frankly, if she doesn't, it's a shame. She emulates very similar to what my own Japanese grandmother would do, though she definitely cursed more than mine did. And she is dramatic when she needs to be, and her comedic timing was on point, which was unexpected. And she has to flip back and forth, and she does that fantastically well. Additionally, both Yoon and Yi-lee give strong and very vulnerable performances as the parental figures, and Kim is adorably wonderful as David. And David as a character is basically the director's point of view, but he ends up being the one that the audience follows, even if they're not an immigrant or Asian themselves. David is an Americanized child, and he's always on the outside looking in. He doesn't know the struggles that his parents are going through, as a lot of non-immigrants don't understand about immigrant families. There's just something that immigrants have to go through that if you don't go through it yourself, you're not going to fully understand. You can sympathize, but you're not going to fully understand it. And even when this film pushes a little bit and shows how racism does exist with many of the Americans around the Yi family, Chung tries to show that the loving side of the reaction of hurt, loss, and honestly shows just the effort that the family makes and doesn't really blame so much the people who say racist things to them. And not to say that those people are innocent in it, but also to show this is an issue and something that a lot of immigrants and than a lot of non-Caucasian people have to go through. Yes, there is a spectrum to that as well, but a lot of people do experience racism because they're treated as a less of a person because of their race. Now, I know there are people out there that do bring up the idea of reverse racism, and I want to break that down a little bit because it is a complicated idea. There's a difference between prejudice and racism. The dictionary defines prejudice as an adverse opinion or leaning formed without just grounds or before sufficient knowledge. Quite simply, this is a prejudgment of someone that is not really rooted in their experience. For example, a dumb blonde joke. While some prejudices are racial in nature, not all is. And that's why it's important to understand the difference between the two. Prejudice is an idea of a particular group, whereas racism is an unequal distribution of power on the basis of race. And this goes into access of jobs, housing, and also victim of police brutality that I'm not going to talk about right now. And basically, members of privilege can experience prejudice, but this experience is going to be extremely different than someone who experiences systematic racism or racism in general. So racism is basically a way of representing or describing race that results in an unequal distribution of power based on race. Because of this, the N-word does not simply signal prejudice, rather it is a reflection of hierarchy racial categories that had negatively impacted the lives of people of color. Now, using terms like that basically emulates what white Americans called a lot of African Americans during the era of slavery. So when a white person does say something like that, it historically is to perpetuate systematic inequalities based on race. Now, this is what makes the term racist and not simply prejudice. Prejudice can exist between everyone, but the issue becomes when the reverse racism card is pulled. And basically, people will try to prove that people of color don't have it that bad and that they're not the only people that have been targeted because of their race. Now, while assumptions and stereotypes about white people do exist, this is basically racial prejudice, not racism. Because racial prejudice is a set of discriminatory or derogatory attitudes based on assumptions derived from perception about race or skin color. And yes, this can be directed at white people, like the movie White People Can't Jump. But it's not racism because there is a systematic relationship to power. When backed with power, prejudice results in acts of discrimination and oppression of groups or individuals. And if you don't have that power, you don't get to define terms of your existence. You're limited in your opportunities. And yes, racial prejudice is directed at people, can hurt individually or personally, and isn't really a good thing. But the people that are doing that don't really have the power or authority to really affect the white person's social, economic, political location, and so are privileges. And this is why reverse racism is a myth, because it's ignoring the power and privilege dynamic that exists between the individuals that are involved. Reverse racism assumes that racism occurs on a level playing field, but we don't have a level playing field. And this is shown in the movie because they are really just trying to belong. And this is a very simple story, but then at the same time, it really isn't. It shows this family just trying to make it in a place that some would say they don't belong in. Then Chung adds on the immigrant experiences, and this adds another level to it because immigrants have to learn to assimilate, but then they also try to bring along the things that remind them of home. To the Yi family, it's the Minari, and even to this day, I get joy from eating things that mostly only Japanese people eat. Most immigrants love their homeland, even though it's been years since they have been back. When immigrants come to this country, there is always this conflict of the cultural aspect versus the new one that they have to try to assimilate into. Now, why would immigrants want to go somewhere where instantly they're put into an uphill battle? because it's worth it to make a better life for the next generation. And that is why this film is a beautiful representation of the immigrant experience. As the film shows, the Yi family goes through a roller coaster of events and still endures. And in the climactic scene, I really found myself in tears. Overall, this film succeeds with its story, its acting, the message, its ending, and some of its details. The only issue I can see people having is that the film does feel a little slow at times. Personally, I would say that the pacing issues aren't that big of a deal, but I understand if people do have issues with that. However, if you hold out, the ending is definitely worth it, because this is a story about a family that just is asking for empathy without really overdoing it with specific acting scenes. It's not a political statement, rather, it's just showing what humanity looks like. Now, in a similar aspect of Bible-related films, let's progress on to the final movie in this episode, Judas and the Black Messiah. Judas and the Black Messiah is a biographical drama film directed and produced by Shaka King from a screenplay written by King and Will Burson based on a story by King, Burson, as well as Kenny and Keith Lucas. It stars Daniel Kaluuya, Lakeith Stanfield, Jesse Plemons, Dominique Fishback, Ashton Sanders, Darrell Britt Gibson, Little Rel Howery, Algie Smith, and Martin Sheen. Now, before we get into it, I did do a trailer reaction for this back when they first released it so you can know what my thoughts were prior to seeing this movie. So I'm going to play that now.
I think this is going to be good. I'm a big fan of Daniel Kaluuya, so we'll see how this goes.
Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois Black Panther Party.
Oh, it's going to be about the Black Panthers. Oh, this is going to be good.
To me, I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary.
Man, this looks already like Oscar award-winning movie for him right now. Oh, man, this looks good. He's also a really good actor. Excited to see him, too. Oh, it's produced by Ryan Coogler. I know it's gonna be good.
18 months for the stolen car. 5 years for impersonating federal office.
Hey, it's Jesse Plemons, also known as, in my book, Blonde Matt Damon.
The Black Panthers are forming a rainbow coalition of oppressed brothers and sisters of every color.
Their aim is to sow hatred and inspire terror.
I will learn all that I can. These ain't no terrorists. You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder a liberation.
I'm already 100% sold by this.
Revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.
Yeah, he should win one for this one, definitely.
Now, while the story is seemingly about Hampton, played by Kaluuya, it really is the true story of William O'Neill, played by Stanfield, who was a criminal who was arrested for stealing a car in 1966. He was then offered a deal by the FBI agent who caught him, Roy Martin Mitchell, who was played by Pellmans in the movie, and he was given two options of either prison or work for the FBI to infiltrate and spy on the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party. Obviously, he chose the latter, and he eventually became the organization's chief of security. He ended up supplying the floor plan of the West Side Panther Party headquarters, where leaders Hampton and Mark Clark were staying. This led to a raid in which both of these two men were slain. Additionally, there is evidence out there that shows that O'Neill actually also drugged Hampton on the night of the raid so that he never woke up before he was shot and killed. Kaluuya as Hampton gives an absolutely electrifying performance that that really is just as riveting as the real-life man himself. His deliverance of the speeches have the right levels of intensity and really honestly conviction. In real life, Frederick Allen Hampton was a black activist, Marxist, Leninist, and revolutionary socialist. He was the chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party in Chicago, but also was the deputy chairman of the National Black Panther Party. Through this, he founded the Rainbow Coalition, Young Patriots, and the Young Lords, and he was able to form an alliance among major Chicago gangs to work for social change instead of killing one another. Then, in 1967, the FBI identified him as a radical threat, and then they put out disinformation among black progressive groups, and obviously then placed O'Neill in the party to subvert him. After his death, it was ruled initially as a justifiable homicide. However, this really isn't the case anymore, as more and more people are considering his death as an FBI assassination. And this is due to the COINTELPRO, which is an acronym based on Counterintelligence Program, which was a series of covert and illegal projects conducted by the FBI aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic American political organizations such as feminist organizations, the Communist Party USA, anti-Vietnam War organizers, activists of civil rights movements or the Black Power movement such as Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam, and obviously the Black Panther Party itself, but also environmentalists and animal rights organizations, the American Indian movement, the Puerto Rican independence groups, and a wide variety that also included the broad New Left and also unrelated, such as the KKK. However, it was stated by the director, that J. Edgar Hoover, that it was, end quote, to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, and otherwise neutralize the activities of these movements, especially their leaders. Not so much on the KKK side of things. And according to attorney Brian Glick in his book War at Home, the FBI had 5 methods in this program. The first step was infiltration. Agents would spy on these people, but they would try to discredit and to undermine trust and scare off potential supporters. The FBI then would exploit this fear to smear genuine activists. Then they would use psychological warfare, planting false media stories and publishing bogus leaflets and other publications in the name of the groups. They would create fake correspondence, send anonymous letters, and then make telephone calls anonymously, and would even create events in the name of these groups to discredit them. And in short, they gave out fake news. Then they would do some harassment in the legal system, which the FBI would make the leaders of the groups appear to be criminals when they were not. They would even commit perjury and present fabricated evidence as pretext for false arrests and wrongful imprisonment. Then they would use illegal force, which would conduct illegal break-ins in order to search dissident homes and commit vandalism, assaults, beatings, and also assassinations to frighten groups. And then finally, they would undermine public opinion. They would actually block leaders from, quote, spreading their philosophy publicly or through the communications media. They again would create negative media meant to undermine these organizations. For example, they even created so-called, quote, documentaries to show that the Black Panther Party was aggressive. At the press conference the day after the raid that killed Hampton, the police continued this by stating that they had been attacked by, quote, violent and extremely vicious, end quote, Panthers, and had defended themselves accordingly. They were then praised for their, quote, remarkable restraint, bravery, and professional discipline in not killing all the people that were there. They then provided photographic, quote-unquote, evidence of bullet holes that they said were made by the shots fired by the Panthers, though this was later found to be nail heads. Hampton's funeral was then attended by 5,000 people, and he was eulogized by many black leaders such as Jesse Jackson and Ralph Abernathy. At the time, even Jackson said in his eulogy that Hampton was murdered. Then, in 1982, the city of Chicago, Cook County, and the federal government agreed to a settlement in which each entity would pay about $616,000 to 9 plaintiffs, which included the mothers of Hampton and Clark. This $1.85 million settlement was believed to be the largest ever in a civil rights case, and one of the attorneys representing the plaintiffs said that, quote, the settlement is an admission of the conspiracy that existed between the FBI and the officers to murder Fred Hampton. So what this film does extremely extremely well is really showed how Hampton had an ability to bring potential enemies and rivals together. He knew that there was strength in numbers and that they could turn heads to their ideas if they all came together. This obviously didn't sit well with the racist government at the time, and the title itself is a direct nod to Hoover's statement that they, quote, must prevent the rise of black messiahs, end quote, and in Hampton's case, they did so by enlisting a Judas-like person, O'Neill, to betray him. The title also obviously alludes to the Bible when Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver to Pontius Pilate. This obviously led to Jesus' crucifixion and Judas' suicide. Though he's not really that fleshed out as Jesus in the Bible, Judas is perhaps one of the most important supporting characters in the Gospels. And this film switches this up and makes Judas the lead, and because of Kaluuya's charisma, Steinfeld does take a passenger seat. However, that's not to say in the slightest that he is bad. The film doesn't absolve O'Neill for his part in killing Hampton, it simply only humanizes him. And Stanfield plays this man that is willing to dedicate himself to the cause of black liberation, but also selfish desires of preventing himself from being in prison. And each scene shows him capturing that conflict that O'Neill is going through. The Bible says Judas should be vilified for betraying Jesus, and in the same fashion, people would say that about O'Neill for killing Hampton. And while that may be true, the film shows reason to sympathize and why people can learn from his mistakes. Sometimes things are more complicated than they first appear, and Stanfield really captures all of this to a T. Outside of these two men, the supporting cast is extremely strong as well. Clemens as Mitchell comes off as fairly calm, but the audience can see that there's something sinister going on behind the scenes. As the FBI really did, he gives reasons and justification for why what O'Neill is doing is important, and then he only escalates his method when Hoover, who's played by Sheen in the movie, puts pressure on him to do so. And this movie additionally shows how much of an impact women had in the party. And multiple films like this in the past show women characters on the side, but this film shows them as integral parts to the movement and honestly operations of the organization. Horn as Judy Harmon gives a very scary performance when she interrogates O'Neill at gunpoint, and additionally the relationship between Hampton and then known as Deborah Johnson, now Akuya Nejri, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, played by Fishback, is really fleshed out in a very compelling way. Fishback shows that Johnson was a strong woman who wanted to fight with Hampton, but also calls him out when he isn't as good as he could be. She's also fearful of having a child in this war zone, and that she's afraid that Hampton may not live to see his child's full life. And Fishback really hits every note perfectly and honestly as charismatic as Kaluuya. And these two are the film's biggest highlights, which is especially surprising given the content of the film. Their chemistry makes their final and tragic moments of the film even more painstaking. Both of them deserve awards coming their way along with Stanfield. This film does, however, have some issues with details. In the film, O'Neill is shown to have problems getting close to Hampton, so he asks the FBI for a car so he can start driving them. And through this, he can engage with Hampton more and earn his trust. However, this never happened, and O'Neill said that, quote, it actually was pretty easy to get close to him because they were short of personnel at the time, end quote. The writers additionally took some liberties with the nature of the relationship between O'Neill and Mitchell as well. They got a lot of their inspiration from the 1987 civil rights docuseries Eyes on the Prize, but in this docuseries you can't really trust what O'Neill is saying because it's kind of thought that he was pressured into saying these things, so they had to change a few things based on the research that they did about the relationship, and also generally speaking relationships between informants and handlers. And also Hampton and O'Neill aren't really accurately represented in the film. O'Neill himself was 17 when all this happened, and Hampton was 21 when he died. Stanfield and Kaluuya are 29 and 31 respectively, so it can really kind of come off as jarring as neither actor really feels the same age as the two men really were. However, one positive detail is that Shaka King does show other things that happen, and not in a typical Hollywood fashion. In the climactic scene, they could have done this huge raid with FBI's coming in, guns a-blazing, but that's not what they did, because that's not what happened. Najiri said that, quote, they sort of came in through the doors and it wasn't this big set piece. We were sleeping and they came and shot up the place, and that was that, end quote. But in the movie, it's shown that he never awoke, but according to Najiri, Hampton's eyes were open and he lifted his head slightly with his eyes toward the entryway before laying back down. And she said that, quote, this was the only movement he made, end quote. By doing this, the film parallels Fred Hampton's murder and the murder of Breonna Taylor in 2020, as both were killed during police raids unnecessarily. So for those who don't know, Taylor was killed while plainclothes police were executing a search warrant and forced their way into an apartment where Taylor was in bed with her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker. Walker then awoke and fired a shot from his licensed gun as he thought it could have been her ex-boyfriend, Jamarcus Glover. So the three officers then returned fire, discharging 32 rounds, according to a ballistics report from the FBI. And in this, Taylor was shot and she died on the hallway floor. Now, the subsequent police report contained a lot of errors, including listing the injuries as none and saying no force was used to enter when a battering ram had been used. And the reason why they entered the house initially was because they believed that the ex-boyfriend, Jamarcus Glover, was involved in a drug ring and had used her apartment to hide narcotics. However, obviously, Taylor and Glover were no longer together. Furthermore, Glover had already been arrested and allegedly told the police that she was part of the business, which is why they entered the house. However, according to the police grand jury testimony, the warrant was never executed and Taylor's apartment was not searched for drugs or money after the shooting. More than a month afterwards, Glover was then offered a plea deal that he would have to testify that Taylor was part of his drug dealing operations, which he rejected. And additionally, he has repeatedly said that Taylor was not involved at all and the police had, quote, no business, end quote, looking for him at her residence, and had denied completely that he said in the recorded conversations that he kept money at her residence. He also stated that Taylor was not a co-defendant in his case. Later on, the police officers who fired the gun that killed Taylor was charged with 3 counts of, quote, wanton endangerment, end quote, for firing into a neighbor's apartment. Under Kentucky law, someone is guilty of this if they commit an act that shows, quote, an extreme indifference to the value of human life, end quote. However, he was not indicted on any of these charges, and even some of the jurors on the trial said that the police, quote, covered it up, end quote. Currently, the FBI is conducting its own independent investigation on this. However, in May of 2020, Taylor's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the officers and city of Louisville, which was then resolved in mid-September of 2020. The Louisville Metro government agreed to pay Taylor's estate $12 million in, quote, one of the highest settlement amounts ever paid in America for the wrongful death of a black woman by police, end quote, according to the family attorney Benjamin Crump. However, similar to Hampton's case, the officers and the Louisville government admitted no liability, no wrongdoing, and were absolved of any medical expenses related to her death, and the settlement prevents the family from suing the city ever again. As these events are almost 52 years apart, these stories show that while things have gotten somewhat better, we still have a long way to go for equal rights. Going back to the film, it succeeds with its story, its acting, its ending, and its message, and the majority of its details. Personally, I would say that these details do not take away from the overall impact of the movie. The acting by the entire cast is worth watching this movie alone over and over again. The only other issue that I see people having is that when the movie spends time with the FBI, it can take away from the film's overall pacing. Though it is purposeful in showing how involved they were, it can get a little bit boring during those scenes. Now, I don't personally find that really that big of a deal, but I can see somebody having issues with that. Overall, this film shows how people will take advantage of people to take down so-called, quote, threats, and really pushes people to ask themselves, will society continue to allow this, or will they stand up and fight? Honestly, the answer is up to the viewer. Now, on to the winner of the giveaway. Now, if you missed it, the last episode was the 100th episode of the formal review, and I started a giveaway contest. I had a lot of entries, and I thank you all for participating, but we can only have one winner. Now, the winner of a brand new copy of Black Panther on 4K UHD is Justin Lomas. Congratulations, and I'll be in contact with you to get the movie sent your way as soon as possible. Once again, thanks to everyone who participated, and I plan on doing more of these as the time goes on. Now, what did you think of these movies? Let me know. Hit me up on social media. The Former Review is on Facebook, Twitter, the Gram, and now YouTube, where I will be posting many things, including trailer reactions. You can go check out the most recent one, which is my analysis and reaction to the Snyder Cut Justice League trailer.
Handle is all the same. It's at the Former Review. Feel free to also check out backseatdirectors.com, where I work with a big team to put out movie reviews and also editorials. Again, that's backseatdirectors.com. Please also subscribe to the Former Review. We're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're now on Amazon Music, iHeartRadio. Honestly, pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast, we have our content there. Also, I'm always wanting to grow and improve, so please leave a review and what you want to hear, because I really do this for you all. I see the numbers, and I really appreciate everyone supporting me and talking to me about movies, because frankly, that's what it's all about. And for anyone who has supported me on a financial basis, thank you again. And if you want to help support on a financial basis, please go to anchor.fm/the-formal-review and click support this podcast. And honestly, any donation is appreciated. Thank you all again for tuning in. And until next time, wear your mask, wash your hands, stay safe, and take care, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Former Review. Cheers, and we'll see you next time.